So hopefully you can all see that okay. So rather than focusing on a specific topic as I have done in the past, we thought maybe going for something not too generic. It's all going to be based around the FAPS unit, so financial accounting, preparing financial statements, which we know from results generally is probably the trickiest level 3 exam. That's what the results are saying anyway. Obviously, everyone's going to find different units tricky, but just as a whole, we know that this is quite a challenging unit. And in the past, if we literally go back through previous AAT syllabus, this has always been quite a challenging unit, purely really because of the understanding that you need. You really do need very good understanding of financial accounting to be able to pass this exam, because of the way that the questions are worded, it really does take that extra step, particularly above some of the level 2 financial accounting that you'll have been through. Okay, so what we will be doing really is going over the exam as a whole. Like I say, so it won't be that I'm going over specific topics. For obvious reasons, we've not got that long, as some of these topics are incredibly long. So what I'm really going to be talking about is what can we expect to see in the exam? How is it structured? Some tips and tricks about revision, etc., and just a couple of other bits to finish off. Okay. So let's get some of the sort of basics about the exam out of the way. I'm guessing some of you will already know this, but equally, I'm sure there'll be some on here that don't. So the exam is 2.5 hours, so you have up to 2.5 hours to complete it. And I would recommend using the vast majority of that time, at least, to be able to go back and check your answers. And it is split over 6 different tasks, and there are 120 marks on offer. Now, the marks are not split equally across the tasks, and we'll be having a look at how much each task is worth shortly. Now, you do need 70% to pass. That is the same across all AAT exams, no different for this one, which means that you need 84 marks as a minimum out of 120 in order to pass. Now, obviously, we aim for as high as possible, but just so that you are aware, you do need a minimum of 84 in order to pass. Okay, so let's have a look roughly at the topic for each question, and then we'll dive into each question in a little bit more depth and have a look at the sort of things that I would expect to come up. Okay, so within this section, like I say, I will just be showing you how many marks each task is worth and the sort of overall or overarching topic that each task is on. Hopefully you will be able to either note these down, but they are recorded, these sessions, and I know that you can either watch them back or through Facebook, and I know that at some point they are uploaded as well onto AAT's YouTube channel, so there will be opportunity to watch it back if you do miss anything. So task 1 is worth 28 marks, and the rough sort of topic area will be non-current assets. I'm not going to go into any more detail at this point because I will then run through these each one after I've been through the sort of overview. Task 2 is worth 14 marks, and again, the sort of rough area that this will be on is period end adjustments, so accruals and prepayments, etc. And then task 3 is worth 24 marks and is around adjustments and the trial balance. Task 4 is also worth 24 marks, and this is on financial statements for sole traders and partnerships. Task 5 is worth 18 marks and is around the principles and interpreting financial statements. And then lastly, task 6 is worth 12 marks, so the shortest task, and it is on incomplete records. So in terms of what you can take from this, task 1, 3, and 4 are the highest mark questions. Actually, if you add up the marks from tasks 1, 3, and 4, it equates to about 63% of the exam. So they are obviously quite key. And then in terms of the examiner's report, the one that has just come out, the two tasks that have been identified as the most challenging, so the ones that people are struggling on the most at the moment, are tasks 2 and 3. Okay, which, like I say, I've been teaching this for quite a long quite a long time now, and going back through the iterations of AAT, these two topics, so period end adjustments around journals, accruals and prepayments, etc., notoriously have always been the problematic areas. Okay, and it sort of brings it back to that understanding that I was talking about earlier on. Okay, so now that we've covered them as a sort of brief overview for each task, what we'll do is we'll sort of expand on what you can expect to see in each task, so the sort of things that I would expect to come up. So starting with task 1 then, which is worth 23% of the overall marks, the sort of things we can expect to see are a non-current asset register. So being able to record assets, like I say, within a non-current asset register. And the sort of thing I would expect to see is something where you are having to add in a new acquisition of an asset. You will probably have to dispose of an asset, and you will probably have to calculate the depreciation and the carrying amounts of multiple assets. Okay, something, just a little note to say to look out for. The depreciation policies within this will be absolutely key, because you're going to need to be able to know, do we depreciate it in the year of acquisition? Do we depreciate it in the year of disposal, etc.? So those notes on the depreciation policies will be absolutely key within this part of the question. We then have our old faithful depreciation. So we need to be able to calculate this on a straight line or reducing balance basis. So again, relatively straightforward. Once you've got your head around this, they don't change it too much, but it's just being aware of, you might have residual values where the asset is worth something after its useful life. So knowing how to calculate that as part of your straight line depreciation, and know that reducing balance is calculated on the carrying amount or net book value. Okay, but being able to calculate it and account for it. So knowing the double entry, so knowing the debits and credits and where they go for entering in depreciation into your accounts. And then the other one that I would expect to come up, or could come up, are disposals. So this is disposing of a non-current asset. So we need to be able to, again, account for that using the disposals account. So knowing that we need to clear out the original cost value, the accumulated depreciation, entering in the bank, the value that we actually get for the asset, and then calculating that profit or loss on disposal. You'll need to know this for just a straightforward disposal where they're getting money for it, so where the business has sold the asset. You will also need to know this for part exchange as well. So if they part exchange it for a newer asset. Okay, so again, we'll need to know all the double entry transactions for that, and learning those and understanding them obviously will be absolutely key to sort of smashing this question. Overall, it's actually quite a well-answered question. And I think that is just down to, there's not too many curveballs. You can either sort of either do it or you can't. So once you've got the hang of this, it shouldn't cause you too many problems. Now, next one, task 2. So a smaller one, because this is only 12%. However, definitely one of the hardest. It's going to be accruals and prepayments. So I would be absolutely gobsmacked if you didn't get something on accruals and prepayments. So again, always has been, always will be one of the most challenging areas of accounting to get your head around. So it's understanding how they affect the opening balances, what the double entry is at the beginning and end of the year. And you'll need to know those for both expenses and income. And if you're there, and I know if you're distance learning, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to say, discuss things with other students. If you're there thinking, I'm finding this really hard, this topic, you are not on your own. It is a challenging one. And usually the sort of path to gaining the knowledge you need on this involves kind of getting it or thinking that you've got it and then doing another question maybe on income rather than expenditure. It all goes to pot yet again. You go back to the drawing board of not feeling like you know nothing. And that is just the way that it goes. But it will all come together with practice and trying to understand, which is fundamental to accruals and prepayments, what you are actually doing. Okay. Another one that I would expect to see is something on allowance for doubtful receivables. So this is creating or adjusting an existing allowance for doubtful receivables. So knowing that there are two accounts involved, which are the allowance for doubtful receivables account and the allowance for doubtful receivables adjustment account. Remember, it can go up and down, and you will be expected to be able to do this calculation for both a general allowance and a specific allowance. Okay, do be aware as well, don't get confused with irrecoverable debt where you are physically writing off a transaction. This is only an allowance, it's a maybe, not a definite. Okay, so again, knowing the double entry transactions for those will be absolutely key. And that's made that little bit harder because it can go up or down. And then the last one is inventory valuation. Just say on, just going back slightly, the allowance for doubtful receivables, we did do a session with AAT, one of these Facebook Lives, probably about a year ago, just on allowance for doubtful receivables, which is on their YouTube channel. So you do have the opportunity to go back and watch that as well. And then the last one is inventory valuation. And this is something that has just been picked up in the examiner's report for being somewhat problematic. So this has been able to calculate the lower of cost and net realizable value. So it's where you're being able, knowing really how to value inventory within the financial statements. So for those who've done management accounting, maybe at level 2, where you've done your LIFO, FIFO, AVCO, slightly different perspective. This is all about knowing that you need to value inventory at the lower of its cost or its net realizable value, which is effectively how much you can sell that inventory for. Again, that, like I said, that has been picked up in the examiner's report as a specific problematic area. So I would recommend paying, close attention to that one, because it is dead straightforward once you've got your head around it. So you don't want to be losing easy marks on that one. Task 3 then, so worth 20%, we can expect to see something on the extended trial balance. And alongside that, I would say some sort of journal adjustments to the extended trial balance will be key. So recognizing, for instance, that the closing inventory goes in twice, once in the P&L, once in the statement of financial position. Learning what's a debit and credit, hopefully we know that by now. Knowing what goes in the statement of profit or loss and what goes in the statement of financial position will obviously be key, alongside learning those journals to adjust the entries. So naturally that takes on 2 journal adjustments, which does cover quite a wide area. And again, realistically, this is all going to be down to your knowledge of double entry. There is a sort of technique that I would use for this. There's a couple of variations, but almost looking at what should have happened, looking at what has actually happened, and then thinking about, okay, how do I get from what has happened to what should have happened? And they will be your journal adjustments. Okay, obviously that's simplifying it quite a lot, but that is the sort of method that I would use to sort of master that area. And then the last one is identifying reconciling items, which I know is one that causes quite a few issues. So this can either be between sort of your receivables ledger control account and your receivables ledger. It can also be linked to the bank and the bank statement as well, where you're having to identify differences between the two and then say what the possible reasons or causes for those reconciling items or those differences actually are. So you may get a list of a few different options and you need to select the possible option. Okay, I think again, it comes back to what I was saying in the journal adjustments. It's all about your knowledge on double entry, because if that is absolutely solid, then you won't have too many issues in answering those. But equally, I appreciate it is quite challenging. The next one then, task 4, another big one because it's worth 20%. So you need to be able to fill out a statement of profit or loss. A lot of this will just come down to practice, practice, practice. So as many examples as you can. So it's knowing the format. So we know that we start with revenue. We then have our cost of sales, which is made up of your opening inventory, purchases and closing inventory, followed by our expenses. Okay, and then in the middle, you've got your gross profit, and at the end, net profit. Okay, so learning the format will be absolutely key. And honestly, the best way of doing that is just do as many questions. Repetition is your friend on this one, and it does become quite straightforward, that one. Exactly the same for the statement of financial position. So knowing the format, so we know we start with non-current assets. We have our current assets, have our non-current liabilities, current liabilities, capital, okay, or financed by section. So again, repetition will be absolutely key to nailing that one. I can't expect, or I don't expect too many curveballs. And then the examiner's report for this has just come out. And that would sort of confirm that, because the results for this task 4 are quite good. So I think if you do have the ability to fill these out from practice that you've done without any issues or too many issues, I can't imagine this causing too many problems within the actual exam. Okay, we also have the partner's current account. So obviously within this exam, you are tested on sole traders and partnerships. And 2 of the points that I have picked up within the examiner's report is just recognizing the difference between sole trader accounts and partnership accounts, which should really be identified as part of your practice because they are in slightly different formats. So hopefully, you would be aware of that doing working through question banks or working through the mock exams. Moving on to task 5 then. So performance ratios. So there is no real trick or cheat way of learning these. They are absolutely essential to learn. And for anyone who is moving on to level 4 after their level 3, you will be absolutely hammered with performance ratios. So learning them now really is just sort of reinforce it when you get to level 4 if you're planning on doing it. But gross profit margin, operating profit margin, return on capital employed, you need to know these ratios inside out. And the best way of doing that, and I'll be talking about revision techniques towards the end, but just flashcards, something like that, and just literally going over them over and over again, and just then trying to understand what they mean as well, which is another one of the points that I'll be talking about. So interpreting ratios. So being able to actually understand, do we want our gross profit to be high? Obviously we do. Same with operating profit, but looking at the differences between the two, can we analyze those? If we have a high gross profit margin, but we have a low operating profit margin, then we know that our expenses are probably quite high, but the margin on our goods is really good. Okay, so being able to take it to that next step and being able to actually analyze what's going on rather than purely being able to calculate them will serve you very well for this task. Okay, and then the last one is professional skepticism. So putting this into sort of simple terms, we've all had a dodgy email in the past, you know the ones that I'm talking about, where you kind of look at it and think, this is definitely not right, or a text that again is a little bit suspicious from HMRC. You think, why would HMRC be texting me, or even worse, WhatsApping me? Seems very unlikely. Okay, taking that, putting that into a professional environment, that is what you're doing, and that is part of your duty as an accountant, to be able to look at something and go, that doesn't look quite right to me. You will have to do that as part of your exam. Okay, so it could be as simple as going, right, okay, we've got revenue of 150,000, we've got cost of sales of 450,000. That can't possibly be right. Something's gone wrong there. So applying professional skepticism is something that you will have to do. And then your last task, task 6, which is, like I say, the lowest marked task on the exam, and I think there'll be a fair few people quite thankful of that, does involve markup and margin. So it is your ability to be able to calculate both of these. So knowing the perspective, so markup is on top of your cost, margin is included within your sales price. Now you may be asked to calculate either of these from either perspective. And what I mean by that is you may be given the sales price and given the markup, and you have to work backwards to cost of sales. Equally on margin, where usually you'd be given sales price, you may also be given the cost of sales, and again have to work back to your sales figure. I also would not be surprised at all to see this as part of a incomplete records or missing figures question, where you've been given maybe the sales price, you've been given some sort of elements of the cost of sales, whether that be, let's say, the opening inventory and purchases figures, and you're having to use markup or margin to calculate the cost of sales and then the missing closing inventory figure. If you've done any of the mocks, that will be something you're aware of. It is quite challenging, I would say, as a task. But again, once you've done a few, not too bad. Okay, so calculating missing figures. So like I said, this can be done using markup and margin. It can also be done sort of bringing back in that professional skepticism. So you may have to complete, let's say, a payables ledger control or receivables ledger control account, where it's giving you the opening and closing balances already, and you maybe have to figure out what the missing, say, discounts received figure is, as an example. And that would form a typical question for task 6. That could be done, like say, receivables ledger control, payables ledger control. It could also be done on the bank account as well, or even the VAT control. So knowing how to put each of those together will be, again, key for task 6. And then assessing the likelihood of figures, that's what I was really referring to with the professional skepticism. So it's being able to identify what the most likely figure is in a scenario. So it might not be an exact calculation, but you may have to look at a set of figures and say, out of those options, which is the most likely. We've seen this in the past to do with what you expect, let's say, the trade receivables figure to be or trade payables figure to be based upon a given scenario. Okay, so that covers what I would roughly expect in each task. I think now is probably a good sort of stopping point for if we have had any questions that have come in, and hopefully should be able to answer them.
Yes, so we do have some questions. Just going to, I was trying to arrange them in time, but I can start with this one. Julie has asked, she says, FAPS is such a big unit. Once I understand the subject, I go on to the next and then forget what I've learned. Do you have any suggestions / tips on studying?
Yeah, so I absolutely do, and that will be something that I am going to start now covering in these last sort of few. I think we've got maybe 5 or 6 slides left, and part of that I will definitely be going through some tips on how to study, because I appreciate it is a big unit, and again, for those who are distance learning, who maybe don't have classmates to talk to, and you know, can sort of bounce off each other in that sense of this is hard, isn't it? I think it's so easy to think, is this just me? Am I just like find this really hard? You aren't. Okay, it is a tough unit, and it does take time to get to a stage of, you know, being fully competent. So try not to worry, and I will be going through some study tips.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're going to cover that momentarily. Steph has asked, are all the assessment answers multiple choice?
Uh, in the sense that they're not all multiple choice. In this, there's no written element, if that's what you're referring to, but there will be calculation questions. So in the sense that it's all going to be based on either calculations where you're actually typing figures in, there will be drop down boxes as well where you're having to select the accounts, and then there will be, yes, some multiple choice chucked in there as well.
Nice. I'm going to ask one more. We do have some other questions, but I'm obviously conscious of time. We might have another stop later on or at the end, and we can get to the rest of the questions. But I'm just going to ask one more. So Emma has asked, will the statement questions have accruals, doubtful debt, etc., included on them in the question?
It's feasible. So it's showing you more about the format. Getting a little bit of feedback, Jaden. I don't know. That's okay.
Better?
That seems better. Yeah. Yeah. So it is feasible, absolutely, that we can expect to see some sort of accruals and prepayments coming in related to the financial statements as well. And if you have accruals, okay, they form part of, for example, if we're talking about accrued expenses, they will form part of your current liabilities, for example. So you will need to know which category they actually fall under, unless they're grouping it together with such as trade and other payables. And because accrued expenses are a payable, they'd be grouped together. But yes, absolutely, it's feasible to get those.
Perfect. All right, I will collate the other questions, but yeah, take it away when you're ready.
Okay, no worries. Oh, well, absolutely loads to get through now. So now we've sort of covered what to expect in each question. Let's have a look at some revision techniques that we can go through. Some of these will probably be familiar, but it's just maybe, even if it's just one or two that you aren't aware of, I think, you know, bringing them maybe to the forefront of your mind will be helpful. Okay, so what I would also say is certain revision techniques are better for certain topics. So there's no blanket way of this is definitively the best way to revise this topic. Okay, because certain ones will require certain approaches that I think are more effective. So flashcards, something that some people absolutely love because you can take them around with you, and actually writing them out helps commit them to memory as well. Similarly with a cheat sheet, I've called it that, but realistically we all know it's a poster, but we're just trying not to call it that. Cheat sheet, poster, realistically works really well for something like ratios, where you can put them either all in one place, or you can use little flashcards to sort of put the ratio on the front. So it might be gross profit margin, and then you write the actual formula on the back, maybe a little example on the back as well. And you can just take those with you anywhere you want and have a look at those. Like I say, or a cheat sheet where you keep it all in one place. You type them all out or write them all down on one piece of paper, and then you've got that to refer back to. Again, I know it sounds, I don't know, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but you know, using like colors as well, sort of color coding stuff, it does help to commit them to memory as well. For most people, not everyone, but it does help. Now, accruals and prepayments. So the key with this is you can write this down as many flashcards as you want or cheat sheets, but the key is going to be understanding rather than repeating. So if you keep just repeating, it won't work for accruals and prepayments because they can ask it you in multiple different ways. So if you're just trying to memorize this topic, you will find it extremely challenging. You need to understand what is going off. So firstly, that would be understanding the actual concept of a whole, which is all about getting the right transactions in the right periods based upon work done or goods delivered, not the actual movement of money. Okay. Once you've got your head around that, all you're doing is moving money around. That's what you're doing with accruals and prepayments. You need to understand how that works to ever really be able to do well on those questions. So obviously repeating certain questions will help, but you need to understand what's going off. Okay, depreciation and disposals. I've chucked this in as just another example of learning for revision techniques. Videos, you know, I'm obviously going to say some of my own here, but there are others out there that are really good. There's plenty of videos available on YouTube, whether that be on my channel or others that have done, like say, some great jobs on depreciation and disposals. But actually watching the T accounts being put together and the transactions going in and out, because it's maybe a slightly more simplistic topic, it works really well for depreciation and disposals, because trying to explain it just with words, quite tricky. But actually watching the transactions go in and out, I think works really, really well for depreciation and disposals. I said this one earlier, but profit or loss and statement of financial position, practice is so key because you need to learn the format. Okay, and you know the format comes mainly from memory. Okay, of course you need to understand what's going on, but a lot of it is going to be about memorizing the format. So just practice, do as many questions as you can on these, and honestly, I don't see that being a huge issue. Now, that sort of brings me on to resources. So I spoke a little bit about certain resources there, but we do have a few. Again, I'm guessing that some of you already know about these, but let's bring them to the forefront of your memory if you've forgotten. So we've got the Lifelong Learning Portal, which is AAT's own resource. So if you log into your AAT account, go to the Lifelong Learning Portal, click on this unit, it will bring up, you know, you've got your 2 mock exams, you've got the examiner's report, you've got videos, you've got e-learning, etc. So make sure you use that. You've got green light tests as well. Textbooks. So obviously a key resource. Okay, never ever forget the textbook. It can add plenty of detail that is missed elsewhere. You can explain things in a step-by-step approach. So obviously use your textbooks, which I'm guessing most of you are. But what some people do, and this is again just going back off what I've seen in the past, they go through the textbook once, never to be opened again. Okay, it's just as soon as that last page is closed, it's like thrown to one side. Okay, when you're then doing your revision, okay, get it back out, get the textbook back out, use it as part of your revision. If there's a bit that you don't really understand, make sure you don't just move on from it, actually go back to that topic. Maybe you didn't understand it. Maybe you need to go over that entire chapter again. Okay. Question banks. So, you know, there's nothing like doing it. Okay. You can obviously read the textbook as much as possible, but there will be nothing that helps you as much as actually giving it a go. Okay, so literally having a go at the questions. And I think sometimes some people do have a little bit of a fear of maybe getting it wrong and then thinking, oh, I don't know it, I don't understand it. That's part of the process. That's absolutely fine. You're learning. Okay, so going through the question banks, using the textbook alongside it to help you is absolutely fine. Mock exams. So this is the point at which I would want to put the textbook away. Okay, I think there's no issues using the textbook while you're working through question bank questions. However, for the mock exam, these are the point at which you should be testing yourself. If you've watched some of my previous lives or videos on these, you may know how I sort of feel about mock exams. They are used as a test, okay, i.e. you should be going into them thinking that you can pass. Otherwise, it is, in my opinion, not a very useful resource. Because if you say go into a mock, and by the way, you're fine to look at a mock to look at format, that's fine. But if you're going into a mock, you come away with 40%, what you've learned is that actually you need to go back over a lot. And that's not that helpful. Okay, what you should be doing, or in my opinion, you should be doing, is going into that mock exam thinking that you have a chance of passing it. And you can then use that to narrow down the areas that you're not sure on. Okay, so just bear that in mind. You don't have to do it, but it would be my recommendation. Okay, obviously, I can't not say YouTube videos. Okay, like I say, they're all my own, but there are others out there that are really good as well. So, top tips then. So, first one, time yourself on mocks. So, absolutely essential, this one, because there is a lot of content within this exam. People occasionally, although it is not too time pressured, if you haven't done a mock under time conditions, and the first one you do under time conditions is your real exam, you are setting yourself up for failure, mainly due to the fact that if you look at the time and think, oh, I'm only on task 2, you may start to panic. So you need to at least do a couple of timed mocks, just to reassure yourself, I am able to answer everything within the time frame, and I am able to go back and look over just to make sure you've not made any silly mistakes, maybe reread over any of the multiple choice to make sure you've not missed anything. That will be absolutely key to hopefully picking up maybe a couple of marks towards the end. The next one, ask yourself why when reviewing your answers. Make notes and don't cheat. Okay, so let's try and explain this with an example. So on screen here, you can see that this is an attempt at filling out a rent expense account with a prepayment. Okay, and what I've got on screen here is, let's say, a student's attempt. Okay, could be your attempt, it could be something that you've done in the past. So this is what I've filled out in my book. And what I've done is I've gone to the back and I've looked at the answer. Now, we can see here, we've got the balance brought down on the right side, but the prepaid expense has gone on the wrong side. So we've accidentally entered it in on the debit side rather than the credit side. Okay. Now, going back to that point on my top tips, this is something that I would highly, highly recommend doing, and yet one that very few people do. And that is, they look at this, they look at their own attempt, they look at the answer, and they go, I put it on the wrong side. And then they move on. That is about the length of time that they spend comparing what they've done to the actual answer. Literally, I put it on the wrong side. I won't do that next time. Next question. Okay, that is about the same amount of time that I would sort of put into accidentally picking up a spoon from my drawer than a fork. Okay, you need to spend the time and go, why? Okay, why have I got this wrong? Why have I put it on the debit side, but why should it have been on the credit side? And then you need to write a little note next to it because it helps to get it into your memory. So rather than just going, put it on the wrong side, because that helps no one. Because if the question is asked in a slightly different way, you're not going to recognize that I put it on the wrong side. You need to think, it's prepaid expense. Okay, Why should that have gone on the credit side then at the year end? Because I'm taking that out. I'm reducing the value because that £3,000 belongs to the next financial year. So I need to remove that 3,000 from my expenses account, reducing the value of it in the current financial year. And we're going to enter it in the next year instead, where it actually relates to. Okay, and all you need to do is just write a little note next to it to say why you should have done what you should have done. Following on from that, we look at the P&L figure. I've got it on the right side, but I've got it on the wrong, I put in the wrong amount. Why have I done that? Well, the technique was correct because I've balanced it off correctly. I did 15,000 plus 3,000, so the technique was correct. But because the prepaid expenses was on the wrong side, it's obviously given me the wrong figure. Okay, so would that cause alarm bells? Absolutely not. Your technique was right. It was the prepaid expense that was incorrect. So overall, your understanding on transferring it is probably quite good. Okay, you might not need to work on that section. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a sort of example of what I would recommend doing when looking back over your answers if you were to make a mistake, which naturally you will do as part of the learning process. Okay, oh, the other thing I put on there, don't cheat, by the way, that's all related to, and I've seen this many times back when I was teaching in class, rather than actually having a go at the question, going straight to the answers, and then we've probably all done it at some point, going to the answers and then having the audacity within your own head to go, yeah, I would have actually put that. Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking all along. Okay, it probably wasn't, because that's why you went to the answers in the back in the first place. Okay, so try not to cheat. Have a look at the question properly and give it a go before you go back and have a look at the answers. Okay. The next one has proved extremely useful, and some of the people who get the highest grades in the past have done this. Draw out your T accounts on paper. It is so useful. So even when the question doesn't ask you to do this, actually part of the learning process, actually mapping it out within your T accounts on a piece of scrap paper will really help you to visualize the process. And if a question, for example, asks you to almost do just part of a process, you drawing it out start to finish will really help you to understand what they're actually asking you to do. So it is something that I would recommend doing. You can do that in your exam as well, but that almost comes back to the whole time yourself on the mocks to make sure that you don't spend, an hour drawing out the accounts on a piece of paper. Okay, remember you do get paper in your exam, but you can't start writing until your actual exam starts. Okay. End of exam checks. So something that I'm sure you already do, but let's just talk about it briefly from mistakes that I have seen in the past, including someone who forgot to scroll down on a question as well, although the new exam format has helped to rectify that because it does come up with warnings. But just make sure that you go back through your exam, leave yourself enough time at the end to go back through everything. I know some people don't like to do that because they then question themselves on what they've done in the past, but overall, it will do you, it will help really. So I would go back through everything just to make sure you've not made any silly mistakes, and just make sure you've not missed anything. So make sure you've answered absolutely everything. It can be sort of simple multiple choice where it says select 2, but you've accidentally only selected 1. So just make sure you go back over those areas and make sure you've not done anything silly. And then this is the absolute last point that I've got on here, kind of a weird thing to finish with, but earplugs. Okay, I've had many students come out of an exam saying that either something outside was noisy for some reason, there's been times roadworks at the time that the exam's been on, or someone's playing the drums in the next room, or you've got that person next to you who's getting a little bit stressed throughout the exam, and it sounds like they're about to smash through the keyboard. And if you get maybe a level 4 student who's doing an exam that is quite heavily written, there's going to be a lot of typing. And when you're a bit stressed, that sort of thing can get on your nerves. So just be aware, you are allowed to take earplugs into the exams. Obviously not headphones, like I say, for obvious reasons, but you are allowed to take earplugs in, and that may save you from getting frustrated, because I know what it's like when there's something a little bit, annoying sound wise and you're trying to concentrate. It's the last thing you want, someone swinging backwards and forwards on their chair or tapping or whatever it may be. Humming is another one. Okay, so I think that wraps up everything within this session that I wanted to go through. I'd say hopefully you have found that useful. And I think, Jaden, have we got any further questions?
Yes, so I'm just going to try and run through them as quickly as possible. Oh. Okay, so trying to see which one is the best one to go for right now. Caitlin has asked, did you know what the revision technique is for cheat sheets? Is there a best one, or?
So the sort of cheat sheet thing really is to be able to put something, to put as much information and condense it down onto one sheet is the idea. So you might be able to take one entire chapter and almost keep summarizing it and summarizing it. Now, what you'll find is the better you get at understanding something, the fewer words you can describe or explain that in. Okay, so what you can do is, if you keep going over a chapter, the more you will probably understand it, and you can then condense that information into literally one sheet that you can use to sort of memorize or understand everything that you've learned from one particular area.
Nice. All right. Michelle was asked, she's thinking about giving herself 12 to 14 weeks to complete this unit. Do you think that is feasible?
Yeah, it all depends. Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is feasible. It all depends on, well, a number of factors really. A, how much time you have within a week, because if you only have an hour a week, then probably not. Okay, but equally, if you have, if you can basically study it full time, then you're going to get through it incredibly quickly. But 12 to 14 weeks to me sounds like a very reasonably sort of spaced out time frame. I would say for the average student, so most people, I would say, who are studying semi-regularly, maybe 6 to 8 hours a week, 12 to 14 hours, 12 to 14 weeks is probably about right.
Nice. Regina is asked, actually, I'm not sure if this is, well, I'll ask anyway. So in relation to different tax year adjustments, is this an element to consider for FAPS?
Different tax year adjustments?
Yeah.
Say that is more a level 4 drafting and interpreting financial statements one than a level 3 one. Yeah.
So Regina, you don't need to worry about that for FAPS. That is all good. I'm just going to ask probably a couple more. Jane did ask, if you're accruing a credit note that you're expecting, is that an accrual or is it a prepayment?
I mean, if you're accruing, i.e. you're expecting it to come in, then yes, it would be an accrual. So for a prepayment to occur, whether that be income or expenditure, it has to have actually happened. So the money has to have transferred. You can't do a prepayment without already having had the money, because it sort of defeats the object. Whereas an accrual, whether again that be income or expenditure, or for a credit note, as you say, that you are expecting, okay, if you haven't received it yet, then it would be an accrual because it hasn't happened yet. So you are manually having to enter that into your system.
Yes, that is all good. And finally, I think this is a good one to end it on. Shirley asks, does Training Link sell any practice exam packs or question banks?
We do sell question banks, yes, absolutely. So if you go onto our website, which is Training Link, okay, so pop it in Google, okay, or someone might be able to put it in the comments. You can purchase question banks through us as well. So we do, like I said, we specialize in distance learning. We also we do sell question banks as well.
Perfect. I think that is a good place to wrap it up. So again, want to thank you, Will, for coming on. I thought that was an amazing session. We covered quite a bit there in that hour. I think there was a lot condensed. And again, this session is recorded, so people will be able to go back and rewatch it. That will be available here on Facebook, but also it will be on YouTube as well. So just want to thank everyone for joining and being a part of this Facebook Live. Again, as I mentioned, these sessions are recorded, so you can rewatch them. But for additional content, you can follow us here on Facebook. We are on Instagram, we're on X, we're on LinkedIn, and we're on TikTok, and we're also on YouTube. But that was an amazing session. Again, thank you all for joining. Bye for now.